Okay, blah 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 blah. Fuck no. Fuck no. Wait, let me check. Eru is not done, guys. Eru is still not done. I am about to be done. Okay. Blah 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 blah. I made a little tier list, if I can say so myself. I made a little tier list right here. Okay. I think this is my personal opinion on how the Novaflare is going to be like. The video itself is probably like 40-ish minutes. I break down everything and I show all the performance. On the left is the changes for said Novaflare. Like how big the change was. Right? How big the change was. On the right is what happens after the change. So that's how this tier list works, right? So strictly from how much they changed, Welt changed the most. This guy legit just like crazy improvements. Firefly's change was okay. It was okay, but she got a substantial damage multiplier. Sena was really good as well, because you got the additional skill, and you can pro that shit twice, every single time against less than 50 HP. Where honestly almost changed nothing. Her change was very minimal. The main impact for Huanhua's change was that they just made her sustain like. You can definitely feel the difference of the sustain. You can feel that shit, right? But you still don't really have an access to a one-shot prevention tool from Huanhua. And I was kind of talking with this guy over here. Hold up. Because it was a pretty interesting... It was a pretty interesting discussion, right?
Holyfield.
Yo, KF, thank you so much for the 8 months. Thank you. I was having a little note here because when I said this, right? When I said the original post, I think a few comments saying like Huan sustain actually changes nothing, right? Like Huan basically is still like mid. Like you will still die, right? Like you can still die with Huan, especially for one-shot scenarios, right? And you kind of just have to be a little bit fair, right? You have to be a little bit fair to yourselves, which is fundamentally speaking, Huan's kit will just never have the same level of one-shot prevention if you're gonna be compare her to the DHPT. Because I think DHPT is like the standard of a sustain that can keep a team alive, right? It is like judging it's like the saying of judging a fish ability to climb a tree kind of thing, right? Because Huan's kit, it wasn't purely focusing on one-shot prevention. It was the added 20% team energy and the 40% attack buff, right? So if Huan could sustain as well as DHPT E0 to E0, I'm not even talking about E2, if she did the same level of sustain as an E0 DHPT, then nobody will be using DHPT. Because you can just run Huan with sustain so well and give you team energy generation and 40% attack, right? So it is more so like they balance it out a little bit more so that her sustain is worse, but utility is better, right? Then this buff does improve her heals. Will it prevent one-shot scenarios every single time? Probably no, right? Because there are even like in part of my video, there was this time, my Sparksy, she reached 8 HP on a Huan sustain because she was up against Sparksy. Because Sparksy in the domain expansion, the 2 minions, they hit consecutively, alright? And if you have no outs, she will just die. Because you can cast an emergency out to heal a little bit, right? So that is like my 2 cents. And this guy here, the entire problem was not the inability to heal. It was the inability to protect the team from getting one-shot. And I feel like it's a fair thing to say because that is her problem, right? That is a problem. But I don't think a Novaflare should completely remove said problem. Because if you do completely remove said problem, then the unit will have no flaws. It will literally be like a quote-unquote perfect commander, right? Maybe at best you say, okay, you know what? She uses like more skill points or like she only helps like attack DPS. But like if she is gonna have the same level of like one-shot prevention, comparable to that of a preservation sustain like DHPT, then it's not really that fair anymore. And I think it's also not too fair to only judge her sustain based on like version 3 sustains. Because are you gonna say that Luocha can prevent one-shot? Right? Even Fu Xuan nowadays, being a preservation sustain, probably can't prevent one-shots. Right? Let's just be real, right? Aventry, same shit, right? Like all the other sustains, if you are gonna get one-shotted, it is not a problem that only Huan will face, right? It is just that DHPT specifically has like the highest amount of effective HP. Alright, Hyacinth, you could say you can run Hyacinth, but you only mainly run Hyacinth Remembrance anyways, and Remembrance are very high HP, right? You wouldn't really run Hyacinth outside of Remembrance because you run DHP for everything else, right? So at the end of the day, I think this buff for Hue, while it is a small buff, I do think that it's a small buff, but it is still a buff that is good enough. Wait, where am I? Okay, I need to stop, bro. Okay, stop. Right, it is still a buff that is good enough where I can say she improved the sustain without changing too much. So she changed very little, but with this added buff, you cannot discount the fact that Elation flagship is going to be running Hue for now. DOT is definitely going to be running Hue. And then every other team that wants to run Hue, you could, or you just run DHPT. Alright, it's like offering alternatives to a team that you are going to be using. And if you do not have set unit, then you can just use something else, right? So I think Hue's placement right now is pretty good, since my personal top 4 teams is Elation, Remembrance.
With the silver 9 GP, is Bailu the rank 1 challenger sustained now?
Yo, Bailu player, thank you so much for the $2 tip. Absolutely. Yep, silver 9 GP is absolutely fucking insane. Oh, Che, y'all should see the anomaly arbitration, bro. It's actually crazy how the anomaly arbitration still for silver 9's global passive, but I'll talk about it a little bit later. But my current top 4 teams, the big 4, right, the big 4, is Elation, Remembers, Break, and DOT. These 4, right? They are like relatively most widely used, more accessible to a lot of players, and they clear very, very well, right? And especially at full E0, right? I'm not talking about E2 final or E100, at full E0, especially because like players in HSR, most players are very allergic to Idolants, right? So at this baseline, Hue can already fit into 2 teams, which is Elation and DOT. In the future, when the Elation sustain comes out, Hue becomes homeless, but she can still fit in DOT. The only issue I have with Hue on DOT is that the fucking trace, there was this trace on Hue's rework where your energy has to be more than 160 cost to get a 24% attack, right? 160. Bro, nobody from DOT has 160 energy cost out of it. Which is like, it's a real fucking shame, because while she works now with like Yao Guang and Sparksy, right? But we all know that she's not going to stay in Elation, because they're definitely going to be releasing an Elation sustain, right? So by that point, the real teams left for Hue is likely Saber, maybe Yunli, right? Yunli, Argenti. But out of all those, the best performing team is still DOT, right? So if you're going to be running DOT with Hue, the entire 160 energy shit just like, it just becomes useless. That is like my only gripe with it, right? So that is gonna be that. I would say, aside from that, Firefly is definitely gonna be still the strongest unit after the buffs, right? The changes is also pretty straightforward. They tripled her super rate multiplier, but after the changes, she's definitely gonna be tier 0. And it's like, at this point, I don't even know what is the purpose of Rabbi and Bodil, which also makes me like a little bit concerned for Elation, especially Evanesia. I don't know if Evanesia is the main push or the sub push, but Silver 9 has a lot of main push sides. Alright? So maybe as of right now, right? Maybe as of right now, Evanesia and Silver Wolf, they could be around the same. I don't know. I didn't play Silver. I didn't play Evanesia, right? They could be around the same. Maybe plus minus like 5%. Like depending on the scenarios, right? Like back then, Firefly, Budo, Rabba, it was like all around the same caliber. If you have the right environments and the right enemies, it's around the same. But at this point, because everybody loves Firefly, everybody wants the girlfriend, she got a skin, she got a buff, she got everything. At this point, it's more like, even if the alternative sub push is comparable to the main push, there's no stopping the main push from getting preferential treatment for being the main push, right? So if this also continues for like Elation DPS, let's just say there's a third Elation main DPS. So, right, so you have 3 Elation main DPS. Main DPS is not the same as main push. So if Silver 9 is the main push, the other 2 main DPS, I think they might just end up in a Rabba Budo scenario unless they give them like dedicated teammates. Then maybe it's like a little bit closer. But if that's not happening, then that is my 2 cents on the Elation DPS kind of situation. For Welt, Yang, and Sena, even though their buffs are really, really good, I think they just don't really compete well enough. I have literally tried running like, okay, especially for Welt mains, right? Welt mains, right? Sustainless Welt is not as free as you think it is. Right? You could run Sustainless Welt, sure, you can, right? Especially at E4 or even E6, right? Main DPS. But it is not as like, okay, you know what? I got an E4 Welt, I'm gonna slap into every single fucking team and he'll be the default slot for like Babin E1 back in the days, right? And the reason for that is because bro uses a kabillion skill points, bro. Bro legit uses a kabillion skill points. And if you expect a casual player base to decide, okay, who do I give my skill points to? Do I give it to my main DPS? Do I give it to my support? Or do I give it to Welt Yang? It will be very hard to balance out the skill point economy unless you make Welt Yang your main DPS. Right? If you use him as a sub DPS, the only two ways you can fix this skill point economy issue is essentially in Elation, because Sparksy and Silver 9 gives you a decent amount of skill points back, or a team with Sparkle, right? Or a team with Sparkle. But at that point, especially if you unlock E4 Welt Yang for like the 30% rest pen, which is absolutely fucking insane by the way, are you really willing to commit an E4 Welt Yang? Which is what led to me asking this question, right? Which is what led me asking this question. What is a standard for the HSR community when it comes to using standard units with Eidolons, right? Because let's just say Welt is not E4, right? Let's just say Welt is E0, right? And E0 sustainless Welt Yang. I can tell you right now, this E0 Welt is not on it. It's a very temporary slot that will very easily get replaced in the future. At E4, okay, it's a little bit more competitive, right? You get 30% rest pen. You get the additional energy for the trace. And bro, I'm gonna keep it a buck. If you don't have E2 Welt Yang, it is pretty much impossible to get to the ultimates. You need that E2 to give you the 15 energy for your traces. And if you don't have it, it will be around 3 ultimates, especially as a sub DPS support, right? So, if that's the case, how willing are we to normalize the standards of a standard unit when it comes to showcasing clears in HSR? Alright, that is basically my whole shebang. Also, I would love to talk about this, but I was like, okay, to a little bit of context, right? Bro was crashing out on me, right? Bro was crashing out on me because I merely just said, is E4 Welt relatable? And then bro crashed out and then told me to go back to my auto cycles before correcting him about meta. It was really funny. Bro was like 19 years old. So I don't know what happened, but bro deleted his post. So I'm not gonna say anything. But essentially, my point is basically, for me, I will never ever recommend anyone to spend their gold spirit tokens for an E4 Welt Yang. Never ever, right? No matter how good an E4 Welt is, an E0 Welt, E6 Welt, right? I would never ever spend a golden spirit for a fucking standard unit, right? That's okay, like theoretically speaking, right? If let's say E4 Welt Yang is on it, and like he is the best sustainless, right? He is the best sustainless support for every single conceivable team because he has 30% rest spend. What, realistically speaking, will be the actual population of players that can actually make use of this? Because just because you have an E4 Welt Yang doesn't automatically mean that all your teams are just gonna be doing this sustainless team. Especially if you don't even have an E4 and you want to commit, what, 4 gold spirit tokens. Because that is a heavy ass fucking investment, bro. Right? That is a heavy ass fucking investment. And the last thing I would say is to spend gold spirits for an E4 in a standard. So that is like my gripe with this. Is E4 Welt Yang relatable? Right? Is E4 Welt Yang relatable? Because if this is gonna be costing you like 4 gold companion spirits, can I say E6 Babin is relatable? Because I put E2 Babin back then, right? Let's say I put E2 Babin. I'ma just spend 4 companion tickets, boom, I get E6 Babin. You know what I'm saying? So that is basically my 2 cents on the Novaflare kind of thing. Oh, it's relatable? Oh, it's relatable. So I can physically go ahead and exchange an E6 Bubbin. E6 S5 Ranmei Bubbin for 0 cost. Because Ranmei is free, right? Ranmei is free, Bubbin is free. You can freely select Bubbin in the shop, right? You can freely select a Ranmei S5 from your Battle Pass tokens. And then you have a 0 cost E6 S5 Ranmei Bubbin, right? And there it is.
You have cooled your last cool, my man.